that goes from the top to the bottom, what do we call that? Sub-implication, that's right. And I guess I didn't get the sub-implication. And this is subcontriety, right? And then super-implication. Okay, so in sub-implication, what are we saying? From the top to the bottom.
Don't you use a contradiction because of no, it's got to be the opposite.
Well, if this is true, if our premise is true here, then we can imply the truth of the one that's below, right? If all apples are fruits, then we know it must be true that some apples are true, because this is a wider category than this, right? This is the genus and this is the species, right? So if this is true, then we can imply that this is also true in sub-implication. And in super-implication, we're saying just the opposite. If this is false, then we can imply that this too would be false. So if some apples are not fruits, using the same subject and predicate, if some apples are not fruits, that's a false statement. We can say that no apples are fruit is also false, because that's a greater implication. Everybody tracking? Sorry for the misstep on the... Okay, now then, we're going to be looking at a syllogism, which a syllogism has three statements in a specific order, where we are going to be now looking at the relationship between the first two statements we call what? We are reviewing probably chapter 18 now. Yeah. Syllogisms. Is that 18?
18 is super.
Okay, so we were starting at 19. 19, we have arguments. And we were going through last time, the first two are premises, right? And the last one is going to be a conclusion. Do you remember that? Is that correct? Do you recall we went through that? Okay. This is why we review these. Okay, so if we, on page 145, that's lesson 20 where the syllogism is introduced. He uses the syllogism, all red plants are living things, all roses are red plants, therefore all roses are living things. And here, let's just observe a couple of things by way of review. In those three statements, the first two are categorical statements, and the therefore we remember as a conclusion marker, and that third statement is the conclusion to the syllogism. So the way we would think through this, if it is true that all plants are living things, and if it is true that all roses are red plants, then the conclusion all roses are living things should flow from that, right? If both premises are true and the conclusion flows from those in a valid way, then the syllogism, the conclusion will be true. If they're true and valid, then the conclusion will be true. Okay, so we identified, if you look at that, in each of those three, we have three subjects and three predicate terms, right? There's a subject term, there's a predicate term in each of those three statements. And you will see how those words, red plants, roses, and living things, each of those occur twice in the course of those three statements. Does everybody see that? One more time?
Living things does.
Sure it does. It's in the first one and the third one.
Oh, in two, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So we're going to identify the first premise we're going to have as a major premise. The second premise is a minor premise. And the third is the conclusion. Okay? So how do we identify what is the conclusion, what is the minor premise, and what is the major premise? Does anybody remember how to identify those?
The word predicate.
Okay, so the predicate of the conclusion, we're going to have a subject and a predicate in the conclusion. We're going to have a subject and a predicate here, and a subject and a predicate here. So in the conclusion, whatever our conclusion statement is, the predicate term, the premise that contains the predicate term is our major premise, right? So in this case, living things is in the predicate position in the conclusion, right? So the major term is all red plants are living things in our example. So that's why it goes up here. And we're going to symbolize the major predicate, the major premise with a P. And our minor premise is going to be the subject of the conclusion. That's going to be symbolized by an S. And we will notice that the word red plants occurs in both of the major and the minor premise, but it does not appear in the conclusion. Does everybody see that? So the term red plants is going to be our middle term. So the major term is a P, the minor term is an S, and the middle term is symbolized by an M. Everybody gets that? Middle term is the term that appears in both premises but not in the conclusion. Okay? So the way we're going to symbolize a syllogism, you have right below all MRP is the way we're going to do this particular syllogism, because we have all MRP, that's our major term, all SRM, and the conclusion is all SRP, right? You see how that works? So we have two S's, we have two M's, and we have two P's. Okay, everybody, that's should all be reviewed.
Well, middle term and major have the same symbol.
No, the major term is going to be symbolized by a P, which will tip you off it. You're looking for the predicate of the conclusion.
Okay, right.
So we're not gonna want to get confused between a major premise and a major term, or a minor premise and a minor term. The premise is the whole statement. The term is either the subject or the predicate. And we're going to have to differentiate that here in a moment. Okay? So it's been a week. It's been good. So I had a little bit of a review. It's been 3 weeks. So, okay. So, yeah. Okay, so we are on chapter 21 today. Right? I'm going to go forward unless somebody stops me. Is this at least somewhat cleaning out things? Okay. All right, so today we're going to consider the mood of the syllogism. Because the syllogism is composed of categorical statements, the syllogism can be abbreviated following the same rules concerning the substitution of letters for terms. In this book, we will have a standard substitution for the various terms. S will represent the minor term, P will represent the major term, and M will represent the middle term, as in the previous lesson. Notice how the following syllogism is transformed. Some black cars are fast cars. All Model Ts are black cars. Therefore, some Model Ts are fast cars. The syllogism is invalid. The conclusion does not follow from the premises. Nevertheless, we may still abbreviate it in order to analyze it readily. When abbreviated, it looks like this. Some M are P, all S are M, and some S are P. So let's go through this. We have our conclusion, therefore some Model Ts are fast cars, right? Fast cars is the predicate. That predicate marks the what premise? The major premise contains the predicate of the conclusion. So some black cars are fast cars. That's the major premise. The minor premise contains the subject of the conclusion. So all Model Ts, all Model T cars is going to be the subject of the conclusion, therefore marks the minor premise. And then the conclusion. So the above is in the right form. We have major, minor, conclusion. He symbolizes that by some. We have black cars is the middle term because it appears in both of the premises, but not the conclusion. Are, and then the predicate of the conclusion. The term, the major term is fast cars. The major term appears in the major premise, right? And is not the conclusion. Okay, So you see how that is now symbolized by putting the appropriate symbols for the middle term, the major term, and the minor term. So continue. When a syllogism is arranged in standard order, the standard abbreviations for the terms, we call this arrangement a schema. If two arguments follow the same logical form, we can say that they have the same schema. For example, an argument that is substituted for dogs for Model T cars, brown animals for black cars, and slow animals for fast cars would have the same schema as the argument above. In other words, the abbreviations for the two arguments would be identical. So what we're doing here is, and again, this is you're going to relate, this is where we're making it math, English math. It doesn't matter what terms you're going to put into these particular positions. If the formula is the same, it doesn't matter what the subject and the predicates are, whether you're talking airplanes or animals or nuclear substances, it doesn't matter what your term is in English, if it's in this form, it's going to function a particular way in relationship to other statements of the same form, as long as they are statements. So we're trying to clear up the language particulars, and if we can get it into its formula, you're going to help to cut through complex arguments if we can break them down into these statements. Okay? So now we come to what is called the mood of the syllogism. The mood refers to the various possible combinations, A, E, I, O, statements that make up the syllogism. It tells you what kinds of statements the syllogism contains when arranged in a standard order. Standard order being major premise, minor premise, conclusion. The mood of our syllogism above is an I because the major premise is an I statement, some MRP. The minor premise is an A statement, all SRM, and the conclusion is an I statement, some SRP. You follow that? So we're going to take whatever our statements here. What is all MRP, all SRM, and all SRP? What would be the mood of that particular syllogism? The mood would be the A what? Lose that. I don't have the all over here. They're all A statements. This is an A, and an A statement, right? A. Right? So what we're doing is getting even tighter mathematical formulas, right? An AAA schema, our major premise is an A, minor premise an A conclusion is an A. So that's going to be the mood of the syllogism. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Now, the last part here that we want to look at today is going to be the extent that I think your brain's going to be stretched. Okay? You just don't panic. We're going to do one more layer to this, and then we've got all of the details to take ordinary language and get it boiled down to all the factors that we need to be able to test our syllogisms, okay? So if you're on the verge of panic, it's just one more little drill into the cavity. You're almost done, then we'll start filling it, okay?
But you were on verge of panic 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay, then you'd be where I am. Okay, so the last section is the figure of the syllogism. The figure of a syllogism is a number identifying the placement of the middle term in the argument. There are 4 possible ways the middle term can be arranged in the 2 premises. In figure 1, predicate of the minor premise. In figure 2, the middle term, in figure 1 syllogism, the middle term is the subject of the major premise and the predicate of the minor premise. In figure 2, the middle term is the predicate of both premises. In figure 3, the middle term is the premise the middle term is the subject of both premises. And in figure 4, the middle term is the predicate of the major premise, but the subject of the minor premise. The 4 figures can thus be diagrammed, and you see those 4 figures. Okay, so that's going to probably sound like a whole lot for you to remember. But the way I look at that is if you see in your book the highlighted M's, just remember that pattern in your mind. And the figure 2 and the 3, you just remember that it's the closest possible relationship. The predicates are the closest to the subjects in that. So I kind of think of like these 2 little check images. In my mind, I have a zing, 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 zing idea, right? So you can have the subject and the predicate and the predicate, the subject, and the predicate and the subject. Does that? So you have 4 figures. Subject, in the figure 1 is going to have the middle term is going to be in the subject position of the major term and the predicate position of the minor. Figure 2 is going to have the middle term is going to be in the predicate position of the major term and in the predicate position of the minor term. 3, it's going to be in the subject position of the major and the subject position of the minor. And in 4, it's in the predicate position of the minor term and the subject position of the predicate position of the major term and the subject position of the minor term. Does that make sense? So you have your major term and your major premise and your minor premises here. So it's where the middle term, gosh, it's like if it's cloudy in the, I apologize. The middle term, the way it is distributed in the syllogism, the major and minor premises, where it occurs. There's 4 possible locations that the middle term can be, right? These are the 4 possible positions it can be in. There can't be any other possible orientations for that. That covers all the bases, right? So we have 4 figures to this. Okay, so now let's read through how this is going to play out, and then I think this will start getting cemented in your mind. Okay, so he says, consider the following syllogism and note how the middle term is arranged according to the pattern of figure 1. No Hindus are Christians. Some Indians are Hindus. Therefore, some Indians are not Christians. I'm going to pause you there for a moment. What is the mood of that syllogism? E-I-O. E-I-O. E-I-E-I-O. Right? E-I-O. That's an E-I-O, and then can you see what figure it is now? It's a figure 1. You see where the two middle premises are, middle terms are highlighted? And it's in the subject of the major term and in the predicate of the minor premise. So that's a figure 1 syllogism, right? So the middle term is Hindus because it occurs in both premises but not in the conclusion. In the major premise, Hindus is the subject. In the minor premise, it's the predicate. If you look again at figure 1, you will see that this is the pattern for the figure 1 syllogism. So now we will schematize the syllogism. We're going to set out its schema. So no M is P. Does everybody see that? No middle term is major term. Some minor term is middle term. Therefore, some minor term is major term. What's that? It's not, not major term. So that's the way we're going to symbolize it. And so here, the mood of this syllogism is an E-I-O. We just went through that. That is, the major premise is an E statement, the minor premise is an I statement, and the conclusion is no statement. We have already pointed out it is also a figure 1. We can therefore describe the syllogism as E-I-O-1. So when the mood and the figure of the syllogism are listed together this way, we are describing the form of the syllogism. The form is the mood plus the figure. So below are examples of schemas having figures 2, 3, and 4, all with the same mood. So if you had no P is M, some S is M, therefore some S is not P. You could have no M is P, some M is S, therefore some S is not P. Or no P is M, some M is S, therefore some S is not P. So given that there are 4 possible types of categorical statements for each premise, and the conclusion and 4 possible figures, there are 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 possible combinations of the mood and the figure. That is 256 forms of syllogisms. These are all shown in Appendix B. So what he's saying is for the mood and the figure, we have 4 possible letters that can be in the major premise. So that's 4. We have 4 that can be in the minor premise, or actually, I guess we'll do it with theirs. I learned capital M, small m, but that got confusing with the middles. Okay, so the major premise has 4, the minor premise has 4, the conclusion has 4, and the figure has 4. So that's why he gets the 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, which gets you the 256 possible orientations for this, right? So I've taken and I've made copies of these 256 syllogisms. So you could try to work on that. I've made a copy so you can have at least a working out of these things. Now you may not be able to do all of this right now, But what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks is give you a few more things to test which ones are valid out of these 256 possibilities. How many of these will give you a conclusion that you can take to the bank, if you will? I'm gonna, yeah, I can run some. You guys, you wanna run these back to them? You only need one. You guys, I'm gonna just give you these. If you wanna pass these guys out, sorry. I should have had my assistant do this. Okay, so you're gonna see that you have these 4 sections, those that start with A, those that start with E, those that start with I, and those that start with O. And then you have all possible orientations for your syllogisms, major, minor, conclusion, and then the possible figures. Does that make sense? It doesn't make sense? Huh? Those are the possible ways you could make these 4 categorical statements in a particular order: major, minor, conclusion, and the distribution of that middle term, all the possible ways that could be arranged. Okay? So, he says, the figure of the syllogism is a number identifying the placement of the middle term in the premises. The middle term is the subject or predicate of each premise. There are 4 possible combinations. When this figure is listed after the mood, it is the description of the syllogism's form. That's what you've learned. So let's go through exercise 20, and let's see if we can pull all of this together. But you basically now have everything you're going to need to do some testing. Okay? Write the form, or the mood and the figure, of the following syllogisms on the blank to the right. The syllogisms are in standard order. So our major premise that all Bibles are books is going to be a what kind of statement? A. Some periodicals are not books. O. Therefore, some periodicals are not Bibles. Oh, very good. Okay, so what is our minor term? Books. And it is in what position in the major and the minor premise?
2.
It's a 2. Very good. You can't be cheating here, don't you know? Yeah. So you see how it's both in the predicate positions. So like I said, I think of those. I think of the 1 is this, 2 is this, 3 is that, 4 is that. And these are the closest they could possibly be, right? You could have here and here would be the other, where it's subject, predicate, subject, predicate. So you have subject here. So if they're both in the predicate position in figure 2 and both in the subject position in 3, right? I don't know if that helps, but in my mind, that helps me to remember the figures. Okay, number 2, some speeches are sermons, is a I statement, very good. No sermons are short sermons, E. And thus some short events are not speeches. O. I-E-O, and then we have our minor premise, our middle term is in the predicate position of the major premise, and it's in the subject position of the minor premise. So what figure is that? Number 4. Does everybody see that? Okay. Number 3, all students are geniuses. A. Some blondes are students. I. Consequently, some blondes are geniuses. I. I, and then the figure is going to be what? Oh, what did you say? 1? Yeah, a 1. So the middle term is in the subject of the major and in the predicate of the minor premise. Okay, number 4, no fish are mammals. No fish are snakes. Therefore, no snakes are mammals. E. When you're talking about snakes and fish, you go E. I'm just kidding. Okay, so now then the middle term appears in the subject of both the major and the minor. The middle term is going to be fish. Everybody sees that. They're both in the subject positions.
Would that be
Figure 3, that's right. See how easy that is? It's good to see a smile on your face, Roxanne. Crystal clear. Okay, rewrite the syllogisms in standard order and give their mood and figure. So number 5, all combatants are fighters. So all Spartans are fighters, since all Spartans are combatants. So we have to figure out what's going to be our major premise, and how will we find the major premise? Find the conclusion. So what is the conclusion? All Spartans are fighters is the conclusion, because you have the so is the conclusion marker. So if all Spartans are fighters and the major premise is the premise that has the predicate term of the conclusion in it. So therefore the major premise is what? All combatants are fighters. Does everybody see that? It's scary when nobody's nodding their head and they're not saying yes. Okay. So if all combatants are fighters is the major premise, and so all Spartans are fighters is the conclusion, then the third one, since all Spartans are combatants, is going to be your minor premise. Okay, so then what is the mood and the figure of that? It's going to be a figure 1, because we have the subject, the middle term is in the subject of the major, it's in the predicate of the minor, and the mood is what? A. Good. A1, very good. Okay, one more, and then we'll call it quits. Some sailors are not poets, because all sailors are mariners, but some poets are not mariners. So, what is our conclusion? Say that again. The conclusion is no. The conclusion is some sailors are not poets. And how do you know that? How do you know that's the conclusion? Correct. those both are premise markers, right? You have the connection of the one, it's qualifying what must be a more sound premise, and the because is a premise marker, not a conclusion marker. Since, for, on account of, because, those sorts of things are premise markers. Okay, so if the conclusion, therefore some sailors are not poets, that's the conclusion, then poets is our major term. It's in the predicate position of the conclusion. So the major premise is some poets are not mariners. And then our minor premise is going to have to be all sailors are mariners. Correct? So the mood and the figure will be what? OAO2. Is Jesse the only one getting this stuff? Apparently. Well, we'll just have to work with that a little bit more. Do you want to try one more? I mean, we're at the order of the day, but okay, Jesse can't answer this one. Okay, all books are paper, and some plaques are not paper, hence some books are not plaques. So, all books are paper, and some plaques are not paper, hence some books are not plaques. Can you find the conclusion in that? Hence is the conclusion marker, so some books are not plaques. Therefore, what is going to be our major term? What's that? The predicate of the conclusion. The predicate is the major term. The major premise has the major term in it. So some plaques are not paper is the major term. Right? So therefore, all books are paper is our minor term, because the subject books in the conclusion has the minor term. So what is this? What is the schema? What's the mood and the figure then? OAO, very good. And what's the figure? We have the middle term. Say it out loud, Roxanne. 2. Yeah. Because it's in the predicate position of both the major and the minor. Okay, that's a lot of stuff you've assembled in the last couple of weeks.